Why in the hell would anybody want to make a painting? I don't know, but I know that there's an awful lot of people who want to make a painting, because I certainly do. Making art is actually very painful, because with all that comes a certain amount of doubt. You never really know for sure. You have an idea in your head, you try to create it. It never comes out as perfect as your imagination, which I think is what the process is. And it's, in a way, it's a struggle and it's painful because you don't know where you're going. It's sort of like being alive but facing death, you know? And see, I get emotional just thinking, you know, I shouldn't do this on camera. It's a struggle, and you don't know, you know, how good you are. And I think that everybody that does this, you know, wants to be great. And it's just a struggle, and it's difficult. I don't know how to put it any other way. But I feel it's completely natural, you know, and it wasn't an intellectual decision to, oh, I want to be an artist or something, you know. And I feel very fortunate, except at the same time, I tell you, you know, you just beat yourself up all the time. But I totally believe in art. I mean, it's one of those things. I don't understand this emotional state I get. Just thinking about it, I get emotional, which I don't want to. I'd like to hide that, but I can't. And the truth is, I am very passionate about the work. I can't really explain what I'm doing in a logical way that it's not science, it's not math. Doing this is an unknown. It's all about it. For me, I'm trying to do something that when I do it, it feels right. Because I can't put words to it, really. I think part of it is the aging process too. As you get older, there's kind of a natural evolution where you give things up to the younger generation. It seems to be their job to take over and take it to the next step. I feel a little bit like a dinosaur in here sitting, using a stick with hair on it and oil paint. Bankston recently told me the stupidest thing you could possibly do is paint in oil paint, which that could be true, although there's something so seductive about it. And I don't know if it's just the material itself, but also it's the history. The other thing is, though, I'm very susceptible to criticism. I can get a million compliments. If one person says something, I just kind of, oh, Christ, I knew it, I can't help it. I mean, it's like, I guess that's human nature, though, Like, I think I'm guilty of looking up and not down, too. I don't have no feeling about where I'm at in this whole thing. I keep looking at those guys going, God damn it, why aren't I there? Why aren't I there? I forget about all this stuff I've gone through. So. I just came back from New York, and I'd been in Chicago the week before. And there's something about walking through the Art Institute in Chicago or the Museum of Modern Art or the New Whitney and looking at these paintings by artists that totally inspire me. And I like everything from Rousseau to, Mondrian to, I saw Toulouse-Lautrec, which I am not a fan of, that blew me away in Chicago. And I stood in front of a couple of Van Goghs, and it's almost corny to like Van Gogh, but I got this guy. When you're standing there, within arm's length of them, I get this weird rush, and which makes me feel, I love to come back to my studio after these trips. So I was walking around, I feel good, but that's why I do it. And I don't, I really wish I had some crystal clear explanation of what I'm doing, and I wish it made some sort of logical sense, because it really doesn't. Basically, for I guess 45 or more years now, I'm trying to figure out how to make a valid painting. Now, what's a valid painting is, I'm not quite sure. The only thing I can tell you is that as an artist, I think your job is you're trying to make an inanimate object have a life of its own. And so if I can make something, a painting, an object, that can hang on the wall 40 years after I made it and people still respond to it, then it must have some energy or life in it. And the problem I have, in a sense, is I'm an abstract artist, because when I came into the art world, and this happens to all generations, there's a certain attitude in the air, and you plug into these attitudes that people are thinking and talking about. So I'm an abstract artist because of that. Before that, I was doing figurative paintings and stuff, but immediately you kind of got rid of the figure, And so the painting language and stuff means a lot to me. These most recent paintings are just about painting space. For instance, I've always envied guys like Hockney, because he's a figurative painter. So David doesn't have to invent his subject. If he's really bored, he paints his dogs, which is really kind of a wonderful place to be, because he doesn't have to justify the picture. And because I'm an abstract artist, I have to invent the problem and the solution. And I have to execute it in such a way that it's believable. So it's like a dominoes. If it starts to fall over, it just collapses all the way. I see a lot of art shows, and I walk in and I see a lot of stuff that looks art smart, but there's no name attached to it, no body. And I think that, I don't know if it's possible to really do something totally new, but you're hoping that what you're doing has a life of its own, a power, a sense that people, when they see it, they respond to it. A couple of years ago, I was in a show in New York, a huge group show, and I sent a stick piece from 1974. And this was a giant, like 85 people in this big group show in several big, important galleries. And there were a lot of artists attended, a lot of young New Yorkers, and these young artists thought this stick piece was brand new. Hey, that's a far-out idea, you know? I mean, that made me feel really good, because they didn't realize this thing was, 40 years old or something, They thought, hey, good idea, looks good. I am constantly questioning. There is no definite answer. They're never perfect or finished. And one of the problems is ideas in my head kind of appear almost dreamlike, and they're perfect. But when I go through the process of making that idea real, it takes on a life of its own. And during the process, you realize that, you think you're going to turn right, but you can turn left, or you can go up or down, and it becomes infinite possibilities. And every time you do something, it's just never ending. I mean, Jesus, I'll probably do this forever, until I die, because it's so open-ended. And I think a lot of it is curiosity with me. I mean, it must be, because I'll get something going and I like it, but the problem is I get good at it. So then I feel like I've got to do something to challenge myself and challenge the things themselves. So right now, I've got like 3 different things going that grew out of these, but the truth is these grew out of everything else I've made. If I didn't make the stick paintings, if I didn't make the window paintings, if I didn't make the arc paintings, if I didn't do the multiple panel paintings, if I didn't do the chainsaw paintings, these wouldn't exist. There's a logic in the construction of all that stuff I've made, the process, not only the physical process, but the mental process. I usually jump right into whatever it is I'm doing. Now, it is true that I work in all different scales and different media. I love to do, watercolors and little, drawings and sketches and stuff. And if I have an idea, I usually just leap into it without thinking of the consequences. And years ago, I can't remember, I was in New York somewhere, and I was with Leo Castelli and Andre Emmerich. And they told me, son, if you'd ever learned to stop changing, we could make you a very successful artist. And I always thought that my job was, if I had an idea, I would have to try it. See the blue painting and this silver painting? These we kind of call them case study paintings because they're somewhat based on, not really, but there's some architectural influence in that. I really like architecture usually when a building is under construction. And the reason is, I don't care if you're building an outhouse or a high-rise, when they start to put together the structure that holds the building together, everything in there has a reason to be there. And the integrity of that thing is like the skeleton holds the body up. That's what I find fascinating. That's what the stick paintings are about. The structure was the image, so it justifies the image. I don't care how crazy it is. If this stick wasn't here, this one couldn't be there. So I've always kind of been fascinated by buildings under construction. Usually, once they start getting clad and finished out, they ruin them. You know, almost every building is beautiful in the bones. These have some Frank Gehry influence in that they're a silver palette and there's some curves in them. Because the ones preceding this were all blue and black and gray, and they were all right angles and straight lines. One of the things I wanted to do was loosen up a bit. And I remembered I was in Berlin, and I walked into a museum, and there was like 5 Picassos or so hanging on a wall. Big, beautiful museum, and all these were portraits by Picasso. And they're big ornate frames, and there was like 5 or 6 of them in a row, and they were lit really beautifully. And so I walked over and I started looking at these, you know. And there's one, and the second one, a third, about the 4th one down. All these had been heavily painted, just gorgeous, beautiful, luscious paint and everything. Here's this one in this big frame and everything. And he took some charcoal and he laid it in. I could just see his mind working, and he looked at it and he thought, that's kind of nice. So he mixed up some paint, really, really thin, probably a lot of turp and stuff. And he just kind of put a couple stains on it. And he stopped. Okay, he probably spent about 10 minutes on this thing, right? Big Picasso signature, and it's in this frame with all these other ones that are lush, and it held up just as good as one that he labored over. And what I thought, you know, that's really gutsy because that's hard to do. So these paintings, what I thought I'd do is paint until I saw something happen and stop. And at first I painted like 10 of them, and it was going really good, so I ordered another 20. Anyway, I did about 50 of these. And it was really interesting because it didn't take too long, but they weren't very spontaneous anymore because I got good at it. But I really liked these paintings. And one of the things I like best about these paintings, Peter Alexander came over and I was painting these. And he walked in the studio, and I had just a whole bunch of them all over the studio. He walks in and goes, wow, these are pretty cool. Yeah, pretty nice. Are they finished? And I said, yeah. He said, you know what you could do, you know? And he said, you know, you're so good, you know, he starts doing that. And I go, I'm not going to do that, Peter, but what I like is that they worked on your imagination, and you participated in the paintings, and they got you off to the point where go, you know, it's like that's the hit I want to get. When I go see art shows, if I walk in, I get inspired or it gives me ideas or something, I feel like the art show I'm looking at is successful. Yeah. If I walk through a show and I just go, oh God, you know, then there's nothing there. But if I can get the kind of response that Peter had when he saw these, I think that's making, art, you know. Anyway, I kind of like these. But it's funny how people have attitudes and opinions about stuff. It's like, I get attacked, like when I was talking about those case study paintings. A lot of people said, these are really nice, but they're just too good. Now, what the hell does that mean? You know? I mean, too good. I don't get it. I carry ideas around in my head for a year or 2 years sometimes before I feel like I can finally try it. It's got to feel right in here, and then I can do it. What happens is I get a thing, an idea, and then I physically try to make it, and I get a dialogue going with the thing. And the thing gets a life of its own, and it can be intimidating. But it also is educational in the sense that it goes, okay, I could go this way, that way. Which way are you going to go with me? And you make decisions, but then you have to question yourself, what if I'd have done this? What if I'd have done that? And I just kind of try to work through it, and it's a fight. I think I always win the fight, but I think you have to also have a real respect for the thing you're doing, because there's two important questions: where to start and when to stop. And I've been accused many times by a lot of people I overwork stuff, or I put too much into it, I should stop right there. And that's a real struggle, because one of the things that happens in the studio all the time is you'll start something with an idea, and man, all of a sudden it's got, wow, that's pretty good, but it's not quite what I had in mind, so you keep forcing this thing, and you have to learn to leave it alone at a certain point. All the geometric things like that, all the multiple panel, the case study and all that stuff, the problem was that I could envision the complete painting before I made it. So basically, I have a picture in my mind, all I have to do is make the painting. And I'm not saying it's not valid, but I was getting to the point where I wanted to not know what the painting was going to look like when it was finished, okay? So what I did was, I decided I would make some of these paintings. So the problem was, though, that I'd start making a painting, and it would look really good to me. Now, so every one of these paintings, and I probably painted, I don't know, at least a dozen or 20 or 30 of them, there's 10 paintings here. So I was very successful in working on a painting I didn't know what it was going to look like when it was finished. But the truth is, it looked finished or exciting multiple times. And I had some kind of predetermined idea in my head that they would get to a resolved point. So a lot of times I'd go farther. Now, I'm not saying I ruined this painting. I like this painting. It was funny. Moses came in when I was making these. And I had one that was, I don't know, kind of all over the place. It had chartreuse and pink and black and, ultramarine blue and everything. He said, that's a really nice painting. He said, but did you ever think about making one in black and white so it was serious? Now, to me, to do a color, this is a pretty conservative one, but to do a color range which is all over the place is much gutsier than making it in black and white so it appears to be serious. I think it's just as serious to use chartreuse and pink and cobalt blue and forest green as it is to do black and white. The problem, I think all of us face, especially today, is the the yardstick that evaluates art now is money. And I can't be immune to that, you know. And unfortunately, the world, because of the media and stuff, is instant, you know, publicness of the value of a piece of art. So unless you're getting $1 million plus a painting, you're not really a successful artist. Well, the truth is, I don't believe that, but it affects my life. I evaluate a painting and if people respond to it. But I tell you, the other thing is that I sell a fair amount of art. I have for years. I've made a living as an artist. I've been very fortunate. And I would tell you that, especially in the early days, I was disappointed about 95% of the time when I sold something to somebody, because I didn't feel like they wanted it for the right reasons, you know? I sometimes question the validity of it all. And then what happens is, because I am alive and aware of what's going on in the world, I'm constantly being shown all this stuff in the outside world, which I'm always putting this up against. And we're at a particular time where the world seems to have taken a turn, and they're all going over there, and dumb Chuck is still over there, which makes me scratch my head even harder. But I'm not going to try to go over there, because that wouldn't be me. The art world, I think, was better, in a funny way, when they had guys like Clement Greenberg around. Critics, they may have been wrong in a certain way, but they also elevated the looking and the analyzing. The average person is totally intimidated by art or thinks it's a complete sham. A lot of people think, you know, you don't work for a living. This is bullshit. Anybody could do that. You know, it's hilarious. You know, Frank Stella's mother was in the Museum of Modern Art one day, and there's a couple of women were standing there and said, God, my 8-year-old could do that. And she said, my 24-year-old did that, you know. The thing is, I do care about what people think of my work. At the same time, I don't give a shit. But everybody's opinion, one of the things I've learned is that listening is important. Like, for instance, years and years ago, when I first moved to Venice, it was kind of interesting. You know, it was real funky down here. So all the artists had Arrowhead water, right? So you rent a studio and you get a bottled water. And the guy that delivered the bottled water had the artist on his circuit. And when he first showed up at my studio, he said, what the hell do you do here? And I said, well, I'm an artist. And he'd be looking at something, he'd go, well, what do you make? I said, well, this stuff, you know, this is art, right? He'd go, really, you know? And he would go and he'd hit the circuit. And then after about a year or two, he'd come over and he'd say, hey, you seen what Laddie's doing? You seen what Bankston's up to? You know, he plugged into it. And his take wasn't necessarily of a valid critic or anything, but the way he talked about it, or what he would mention, would let me know how people perceive stuff.
So the idea that you just do this only for yourself is bullshit. I think it's you're trying to communicate with other people, and that's why you take your work so seriously.
Art is something that is very hard to define or identify. And I think Hemingway said you need an ironclad shit detector, and they're hard to come by. I think for me, when I was a kid growing up, I didn't get very much attention or love, you know, from my parents. But I always liked to make things like tree forts and bows and arrows and, you know, stuff like that. And as I got older, I did model cars and stuff. And I was really good at it. So I'd get a lot of attention for that kind of stuff. And like in art classes, if they needed a poster made or something, they'd always pick my poster and everything. And so I think that there's a feeling of self-worth, and you feel somewhat appreciated because you get attention for doing stuff well. But I never really thought about being an artist. It wasn't on the radar. I think I told you before, the guys in my high school, we were focused on Delco Moraine or NCR to go to work a graveyard shift, so you get double time. And it was great if you could land a great factory job, on the off hours you got paid more money. And so factory jobs and cars were important, you know. And college, I don't think the word college was ever mentioned in my house. My dad, when he left us in Dayton, Ohio, he moved to Thousand Oaks with a woman. And I got in some trouble in high school, and they were going to put me in a foster home. And my dad agreed to take me, to save me from having to go to a home. Anyway, so I came to California. And, you know, once I saw California, I mean, Ohio didn't look so good anymore. Anyway, at one point, I was servicing swimming pools, and I was carrying hod and working for roofers and all this heavy physical construction stuff. And I bought myself a Corvette, because I always wanted a Corvette. I bought a '59 Corvette that was in just thrashed condition. My father co-signed a loan for me. And anyway, so I put a 327 engine in that thing, put 2 4-barrels on it, put racing slicks on, made this Corvette like just a street hot rod. So I wanted to take it back to Ohio to show off. So in the summer, I drove back to Ohio to show all my buddies, and you know, we used to drag race on the streets and stuff. And so I left, and I gave my dad my car payments for the summer and everything. Well, my dad was an alcoholic gambler, and he would get together, get his life together, and it'd fall apart. Anyway, I took off, and I stayed back there about 4 months, much longer than I'd planned. So finally, it's getting bad weather in Ohio, so I had to head back to California. So I got back to California, went up to Thousand Oaks. It was at night. I drove up to my dad's house, you know, and kind of knocked on the door, and my stepmother came to the door and said, "He doesn't live here anymore, and neither do you," and slammed the door in my face. So I pounded on the door, and I said, "Where is he?" And she said, "He's down at this hotel downtown Thousand Oaks, this Fleabag Hotel." So I went down to see my dad. And I knocked on the door, and he came to the door, and he said, "Son, I'm sorry." He says, "You know, I'm in a little trouble here. I'm behind my rent, and you can't stay here because they're about to throw me out anyway." And I was down and out, and he said, "By the way," he said, "I hate to tell you this, but I didn't make your car payments, and they're looking to find you to repossess your car." Now, my Corvette is everything to me, right? So he literally shuts the door in my face, you know. And so anyway, I went driving around. I ended up sleeping in the car that night. And a day or so later, I was driving around the back streets of Thousand Oaks, just devastated because I know they're looking for me. I have no money. And I saw this house that was a box kind of sticking off the side of this hill, like cantilevered out. And I just caught my eye, and I pulled up, and it was under construction. I parked the car, and I was just checking it out, you know, it's kind of a dumb curiosity. And so I walked up to it, and I was looking around, and this guy comes out with a hammer in his hand. He goes, "What do you want?" Because I look like a thug, you know, a thug, you know. And I said, "Man, I just saw this house, and, I've never seen anything like this before, you know." So anyway, it turned out he was a nice guy. He was a young architect from Michigan, and he and his wife had graduated. He came to Thousand Oaks, and he was building his house, and he was going to have his architecture office in there, and his wife was an art teacher. And so she was teaching art in the valley, and she'd drive to teach school every day, and he was building his house by himself. And so I sat down and had a cup of coffee with him, and was telling him my situation, you know. And he looked at me and said, "Can you work?" And I said, "Man, I've done all kinds of stuff." He let me live in the house. I slept on the floor in his wife's studio. And I worked there to help him finish the house. And it was interesting because he and his wife took a real interest in me. And I had, it's weird, I get emotional. I shouldn't do this, see, I get emotional when I think about it, because I don't think about this stuff very often, you know. Anyway, I had some sketchbooks and stuff, and his wife said, you know, thought, you know, you got a lot of talent. She said, you should go to school and, you know, take art classes. And to me, it was like, you know, go to school and take art, you know. Anyway, I can't do this. They convinced me to go to Ventura Junior College. And they took me up and enrolled me in all these classes. It's like, I remember having lunch with Frank Stella, and this was years and years ago. I had lunch with Jasper Johns one day and Frank Stella the next. I was a really young kid. And the difference of experiences and what we did was fascinating. Like for Stella, at the time he was missing his two front teeth. His hair was just a matted mess. He's got a mangled hand, you know. And we went upstairs to eat, and he said, we're gonna have hamburgers. And I went, fine. And so he ordered his rare from whoever was cooking, you know, and we're sitting there at a counter, and the hamburgers sit down, and I'll never forget, Frank picks his thing up, and he bites into it, and ketchup and stuff comes running out where his teeth are missing, you know, and he's all sloppy and everything. But we're sitting there, I look up, and here's a little Jasper Johns flag. And I said, God, that's cool. I just had lunch with Jasper yesterday. He said, huh. He said, you see that? I said, yeah. He says, that's sculpt metal or something. He said, I got that from Jasper. I traded Jasper a little 12-inch black painting for that. He said, I got it from Jasper. And he said, Jasper called me and said, Frank, I want to borrow that. We're going to make a multiple from it. He said, no. And he says, can you believe I told Jasper Johns no? I mean, and to me, I mean, there was a lot to both of those lunches. Jasper actually made a souffle. So we're going to have a souffle. I go, oh, I love souffle. I don't know what a souffle is, right? And he said, you have to, excuse me, I have to paint just a little bit before we have lunch. And he had a beautiful layout, silverware, wine glass, everything. Complete opposite from Frank's experience. But to me, I think those things were actually, you know, really important in me being where I'm at today. It's like visiting, you know, Billy Al Bankston and Larry Bell and knowing John Chamberlain. It made me feel comfortable trying to do what I'm doing. I have created all these rules in my head that I live by, and aesthetically and everything else. And for instance, I thought that a straight line was more serious than a curved line. So when I was making the tree branch paintings, I would hunt out ones that had nice subtle angles to them. And I would bring thousands of branches to the studio, and I'd go through and I'd select a section that would fit a perfect, you know, drawing angle in a piece. And then I got thinking about it, and I thought a lot about, you know, like figurative painting. And there's a certain curve and a lusciousness of, you know, female form and stuff. And I got to looking at a lot of paintings, and I realized that curves come up in history a lot, and the reason is if you consider yourself a machine or a machine, yeah, and you hold something in your hand to make a drawing, that you have a wrist, an elbow, and a shoulder, and you tend to make these lines, right? Things happen, and so if you look at art without kind of real objectively, you'll see all these beautiful curvy lines in paintings. And I think a lot of it's because the human body as a machine is very capable of doing this. So I thought to myself, all right, why don't you do that? You know, put aside your prejudices about straight lines and geometry and stuff, and get a brush and make some, lines, right? So I started doing these. And what happened to me was I started coming up with these forms in here, these loopy-like forms. So a few of them I filled in and I scrape out and everything, because I didn't want to do shapes, so I was doing line. Line creates shape. Anyway, I made these paintings. And actually, I really love these paintings, but it was interesting because these were oil paint, because I wanted them to be kind of gooey and everything. And I scraped them and everything. And if you notice, there's a lot of fracturing in the surface and stuff. When I made these paintings, I had a dealer in New York, and he looked at them, he said, God, those are great. He says, but I can't show these. And I said, why? He says, God, look, they're all cracked and everything. And I said, yeah, but that's because they're, I made them and scraped them, and it's, and he said, oh God, no, collectors will freak out over those. So anyway, we never showed these things. A couple of years later, he called me and said, hey, you got any of those paintings left? People start to like them. These evolved into those. So when I went to Kauai, there's plants that have chartreuse leaves, but the backside's violet. And so I was trying to take some inspiration from the vegetation in Hawaii, and these things started developing. And they're acrylic. And the nice thing about acrylic is you can't make a mistake with it. You can hose it off, pee on it, thin to thick, thick to thin. It doesn't make any difference. Oil paint is a whole other ball game. So it allowed me to do all kinds of funny washes and stuff. And so this is from the series of the Hawaiian paintings. But part of the problem was I started getting these loopy leaf-like forms and stuff. And they went through several generations. And one of the things about them, to get acrylic paint to look good, I think acrylic doesn't look as good as oil. Oil paint has a certain amount of pigment and density and color that you can't really achieve with acrylic. And so to make acrylic paintings really look good, you gotta be pretty slick and do a lot of funny moves and stuff. So these paintings have a lot of underpainting and scraping and building up and everything, so that the paint quality itself looked good. And I think anybody, the problem with acrylics, when you're painting on them and they're wet and everything, they look pretty good. But when they dry out, when the water, evaporates and stuff, they flatten out. Where oil paint, you put a stroke on it and the brush strokes stay there, the physicality, the intensity doesn't go away. And of course those, I painted myself into a real dilemma because they kept getting more and more and more and more dense and time consuming, which I don't give any credit to time and stuff. The longer you spend on a painting, the worse it gets usually. In fact, I read a thing just recently, Picasso once said, never finish a painting. And I'll tell you, that's really good advice, but only a painter would understand that, because you have a tendency to kill paintings. You take the life out of them by overworking them and stuff. people get comfortable with stuff that they associate you with. And when you make a move, they're not sure. But I don't think the artist is sure either. I don't figure out a strategy or a process to do them. It just sort of naturally happens. But I just experiment, and I start goofing around and putting stuff together and trying stuff. And I put something on, I look at that a while and go, hey, maybe I ought to do this, do that, it organically grows. Part of the thing is that it's crazy, I need to work. I don't, if I go away for a week, I got to get back here, and plus, it's kind of crazy. A lot of people come in my studio all the time and go, God, are you getting ready for a big show? And I go, no. This is just normal production. About in 98 or so, I was painting some paintings that had these big ovoid shapes in them. And I painted this painting one day. It had big purple blobs and kind of green background. And for some reason, the blob in this painting looked like a potato. It's like seeing a face in a cloud or something. And then once you see that, you can't see the cloud anymore. You only see what you think you're seeing. And so I got to thinking about it. So I drove over to the marina to Gelson's, and I went to look at potatoes. And I started going through the potatoes. And before long, I had about 150 of them in a cart. Red potatoes, brown, all these potatoes. And I was looking at them for form, organic form. And my idea was that I appropriated a stick from nature in the 70s or late 60s because I found this line I could use. And so I thought, okay, if I take this organic form from nature, maybe I can do something with it. So I brought all these potatoes back to the studio, and I put some nails on the wall. I stuck them on the wall, and I liked the way they looked, so I made some little clusters of them. I thought they looked really good, so I cast them in bronze. And so I had a couple of them hang, and also when they were on the wall, they were casting shadows. So I thought it's kind of an interesting form. So once I made some of these sculptures, I was looking at them, I made a few drawings from them. And in the drawings, I could put not only the physical form, but the result of the form, which would be the shadow in a sense. I did that, and of course, being me, I like to blow stuff up in a bigger scale. So we went into these. I used to get angry with a lot of artists because their work would go downhill, or they'd stop working, or they keep repeating themselves. But what I realize is everybody would be Picasso if they could. They can't. And people they dry up. And it's because life gets in the way. Shit happens to people. It's not this perfect constant adolescence, naive, enthusiastic experience. Stuff happens. And like money and fame, they can be dangerous because you get stuck in a rut, and you want that. Boy, it's hard to give up success. You know, that's like candy. You get that stuff and you want it again. So how many bands, they have a hit song, man, that, you know, they keep cranking out that same song with a little variation. It sounds the same because they've become famous and successful. But if you do that too long, you can't get back that freedom you had to make that in the first place. A lot of the work from the 70s at that time period that was really being examined was the kind of work that could be made by someone else. If you had a blueprint, you hand it over to a fabricator and they would make it for you. And my thought about making art has always been that I should personally do it, hands-on, make the thing, and like when you're making a painting or a chainsaw painting, you're making a decision a second. You know, you have to stay right on top of it, and it's the dialogue that I have with the stuff I'm doing that's important. So nobody else could make chainsaw paintings. I could tell them what size, hand them a saw, but this was just a blank piece of wood. So when I start cutting in this thing, somebody said it was the closest thing to Pollock, really, because Pollock just sort of dribbled, and it was almost a physical dance or a performance. And I took the chainsaw and just started gouging into the wood. I was drawing in negative spaces the way I had it in my head. The insanity of this, when I did them years ago, I never really thought how crazy and dangerous it is. It was just, I had an idea, I just did it. And I mean, there was no learning process or anything. I bought a saw, and started cutting away, you know. And the thing was interesting when I decided to do some of these, partially because, you know, at that point I was like 65, retirement age and everything. I said, I can still do this, right? And nobody else, I mean, you couldn't hire Jack Brogan or one of the fabricators to do it, so I'd have to do it myself. So I leapt into this thing. And so when I made these, I made 10 big ones and 10 little ones. And I could have easily stuck with this and you could have gone somewhere with it. But being older, I don't know if wiser or more cautious or whatever, you know, the life value, and, you know, you start to look at, you know, reality a little different when you're in your, you know, 60s. And I realized that there's no way I should be doing this kind of thing. And it's really weird. You walk into an empty room by yourself in the morning and you work. I wish I'd get to a point in my life where I could take time off, not feel guilty, love the work I'm doing, you know, smell the roses or whatever, and But the truth is that I beat myself up all the time. But I think that that's a necessary ingredient, and it's a weird obsession. You can't escape yourself, as hard as you try. So there's going to be a common thread, because you have comfort zones too. I keep trying to reinvent myself, but when I stand in front of a blank canvas, somehow this feels more comfortable than this, and I'm constantly trying to stretch myself. In fact, one of the reasons we travel so much and do so much, I'm trying to see the world from another point of view, to make sure that I'm not closed-minded and just following the same path, You got to keep your eye on the big ball, not the little one. And if you're doing something, I think so many people are trying to get acceptance in an audience and stuff, and they isolate the audience they're after. I don't care if it's your peer group, your school, your teacher, a specific art scene you like, you want to fit in. That's narrowing your focus. It's the little ball. And so what you got to do somehow, and I mean, I don't know if I'm doing it or not, but you got to realize that this thing's got to communicate to somebody in the Solomon Islands who's never been in a goddamn Larry Gagosian gallery. And it's human activity, and I guess it's a celebration of what separates us from the other animals. We have a thumb and imagination. And the difference between craftsmen and artists are the craftsman takes real pride in the object. They polish and buff that goddamn thing till it's got a perfect shine on it and set it there and point to it. And artists don't do that. Yeah, they say, but the focal point is in here. That perfection that you never can do out there anyway only exists in your imagination. You get a certain aesthetic or attitude about stuff, and you can't switch horses. People think I jump around all the time, but the truth is that I am very focused on painting and sculpture. To me, that's art. Pushing the boundaries for the sake of pushing the boundaries is of no interest to me at all. I've been using little brushes to leave a lot of brush strokes in these and stuff, because that's one of the things about oil paint that acrylic doesn't do. You put a mark, you see the mark of the brush. There's a certain personality connected to the work that is very unique to that person who made that in their lifetime. I know it sounds silly, but I get a terrific hit out of just looking at the way maybe paint slid off the brush stroke of de Kooning, and I just love that stuff because it does something for me. I get the same hit out of a Picasso as a Vermeer as a de Kooning. Not that one's better than the other, but they're all in the same game somehow. And all I want to do is be part of that game because I truly, honestly love it and believe in it. We don't just need a roof over our head and plumbing and all that. We need this other thing that happens from a human activity that makes people stand out. I don't know why people's brains work to make them stand out and be special, but some people can do it and most people can't. And so why deny that, you know? It was kind of far out. The other night I had an opening, and it was a little show up in Reno. And so the gallery up there, I didn't want to give them these new paintings, so I gave them some stuff over the last couple of years, you know, and so there was 2 or 3 different bodies of work. And at the opening, this guy comes up to me and he says, "Can I pick your brain for a minute?" And I said, "Sure, what do you want to know?" And he said, "This is really exciting." He said, "But what I can't figure out is," he says, is it the ideas, is it mental, or is it the physical talent to be able to do it? You know, what's the percentages of, what does it take to do that?" And I just thought I said, you know, it's really interesting. I don't really break it down that way. Ultimately, I would say that talent doesn't count for anything. It's just something you assume a person that wants to be a painter or an artist has to have. But the physical act of making art, like, I never gave any value or thought about how does one go about doing what you want to do. It used to drive me kind of crazy when dealers and stuff would want more of the same, and they told me if I'd stick with something, they could make me famous and stuff. But I thought that my job was to not do that. And so for me, what is kind of interesting now, after it's been close to 50 years, I think part of Arnoldi is change and evolution. And in spite of everything, I think people are starting to accept that. Art is not that particular painting or that particular painting. The art is the trail over a lifetime of where your mind's going, and the work is just evidence of a particular day in the cycle. I mean, this is my job. This is how I make a living. I don't have some secret source of income coming in. I'm not a rich kid or anything. And people frequently say, "God, you must have so much fun." Not that I don't enjoy what I'm doing, but it's not amusing or happy. It's work. It's problem solving, and it's just a natural evolving thing. And part of what I think that part of the process is constantly looking and observing and questioning everything.